The color of invisibility was gray. Not the soft gray of a dove's wing or the dramatic charcoal of a coming storm, but the flat, forgettable gray of dust on a forgotten windowsill. It was the color of my dress, the color of my disposition, the color my stepmother, Lady Seraphina, had assigned to my soul. I stood behind a heavy tapestry depicting a rather gruesome mythological hunt, the woven threads smelling of damp stone and ages of neglect. From this vantage, I could see the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor without being seen, a ghost at my own family's feast. The music of the orchestra was a muffled heartbeat against the stone, a rhythm for a life I was not permitted to join. "She is quiet," a visiting lord murmured to my father, his gaze flicking toward my sister, Rosalind, who was a confection of rose silk and glittering diamonds. My father, a man long since hollowed out by a desire for peace at any price, offered a weak, watery smile. "Alara has a delicate constitution," he replied, the lie worn smooth with use. My constitution was as robust as the ancient oaks on our land. It was my spirit they had been systematically trying to break. My stepmother, ever poised, glided to my father's side. Her smile was a beautiful, terrifying thing, a perfect crimson curve that promised only pain. "She prefers her books to people," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Such a serious little thing. We do worry. She has none of Rosalind's fire." They spoke of me as if I were a piece of unsatisfactory furniture, a chair with a wobbly leg that one hides in the attic. I pressed my fingers against the rough weave of the tapestry, focusing on the texture to ground myself. This was my life, a series of small, calculated humiliations designed to render me non-existent. I was the inconvenient daughter, the plain one, the living reminder of my father's first wife, whose memory Seraphina had worked tirelessly to erase. Tonight's ball was meant to secure a match for Rosalind. I was here on the strictest condition that I remain out of sight, a silent footnote to my sister's triumph. My shoes were thin-soled slippers, meant for the bedchamber, not for dancing, a final, petty insurance that I would not be tempted to step into the light. The chill of the flagstones seeped through them, a constant reminder of my place. I closed my eyes and retreated to the one place they could not touch, my mind. I began to deconstruct the ballroom not as a social arena, but as an architectural marvel. The cantilevered balconies, the soaring fan vaults of the ceiling, they were a symphony of mathematics and ambition. I traced the stress lines in my imagination, calculated the load borne by each flying buttress, and wondered at the genius of the long-dead mason who had dared to hang so much stone in the air, seemingly by faith alone. This was my secret passion, the language of structure and form, a world of logic and beauty far removed from the shifting, treacherous currents of society. A sudden hush fell over the hall, a silence so profound it was like a physical blow. The music faltered, then died completely. I opened my eyes, peering through a thin spot in the tapestry. Every head had turned toward the grand entrance. Framed in the massive oak doorway stood a figure who seemed to suck all the light and air from the room. He was tall, dressed in severe, immaculate black that made the colorful silks of the other men look foolish and gaudy. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, his expression unreadable, his eyes a cold, piercing gray that made the color of my dress feel like a confession. The Duke of Valerius. Alistair Valerius. He was more myth than man, a recluse of immense wealth and power who had not attended a social event in a decade. Whispers said he was cruel, that he was haunted, that a tragedy years ago had frozen his heart to ice. His presence here was an earthquake, and the aftershocks were visible on every stunned face. My stepmother recovered first. I saw the predatory gleam in her eyes as she propelled Rosalind forward. This was an opportunity beyond her wildest dreams. Rosalind, beautiful and radiant, curtsied perfectly before the Duke. He gave her a nod so brief it was almost an insult. His gaze swept the room, dismissive, analytical, as if he were inspecting a property for purchase. It passed over the glittering chandeliers, the hopeful faces of the debutantes, the anxious expressions of their mothers. It passed over my father's trembling smile and my stepmother's frozen one. And then his eyes stopped. They fixed on the corner of the room where I was hidden. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he could see me through the threads, that his gaze could pierce stone and wool and shame. I shrank back, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. It was impossible. He was looking at the tapestry, perhaps, admiring its age. The Duke took a slow step forward, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence. It was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, a low, resonant baritone that vibrated through the floor. "Lord Ashworth," he said, his eyes never leaving my corner. My father scurried forward, bowing low. "Your Grace, an unexpected honor." The Duke ignored the pleasantry. He pointed a single, black-gloved finger directly at my hiding place. The gesture was so precise, so unambiguous, that a collective gasp went through the room. My blood turned to ice water. He knew. But how? How could he possibly know? "You have 2 daughters," the Duke stated. It was not a question. Seraphina's voice was strained, high-pitched. "Your Grace, you have met our Rosalind. Our other? She is not well this evening." The Duke's lips thinned into a line that was the antithesis of a smile. "She seems well enough to stand. I do not abide liars, Lady Seraphina." The rebuke was quiet, but it cracked through the room like a whip. My stepmother flinched as if struck. He then uttered the words that would shatter my world, the words that would echo in my memory for the rest of my life. His voice was cold, clear, and utterly uncompromising. "Bring me the one they kept barefoot." The hall went cold. Not just quiet, but frozen, a tableau of horrified disbelief. Barefoot. He had noticed my inadequate shoes. He had seen my humiliation, and he had named it in front of everyone. My stepmother's face was a mask of white fury. My father looked as if he might faint. 2 footmen, their faces pale and uncertain, approached the tapestry. One of them pulled it aside, exposing me to the glare of 100 pairs of eyes. I stood there, blinking in the sudden light, a gray moth pinned to a board. The shame was a physical force, a hot wave that threatened to buckle my knees. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I was a creature of the shadows, and they had dragged me into the sun to die. The Duke's eyes were on me, and for the first time, I saw something beyond the cold severity. It was not pity, it was recognition. A flicker of something focused and intense that made no sense. "Come," he commanded, his voice softer now, intended only for me. I could not move. My thin slippers felt like shackles. But the footmen were on either side of me, their presence an unspoken threat. With no other choice, I took a hesitant step, then another, walking the longest journey of my life across the polished floor. The whispers followed me like serpents hissing in the grass. The other one. So plain. What can he possibly want with her? I stopped before him, my head bowed, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I braced myself for the final crushing humiliation. Perhaps this was some elaborate cruel game of his own devising. He did not speak to me. Instead, he addressed my father again. "I will be calling on your daughter tomorrow. At my estate, see that she is ready by 10. He turned without another word and strode from the ballroom. The doors closed behind him with a quiet thud that sounded like a death knell. He left behind a maelstrom of confusion, a ruined social evening, and me, standing in the center of it all, finally, terribly visible. The journey to Valerius Keep the next morning was a silent, tense affair. My stepmother had not spoken a word to me since the Duke's departure, her fury a palpable, simmering entity that filled the carriage. She had forced me into one of Rosalind's old dresses, a pale blue silk that hung on my frame, making me look like a child playing dress-up. The message was clear. You are nothing on your own. You borrow even your beauty. I expected Valerius Keep to be a Gothic monstrosity, a reflection of the Duke's forbidding reputation. Instead, it was a masterpiece of restrained elegance and structural genius. Set against a windswept cliff overlooking the sea, it was a building that did not fight the landscape, but conversed with it. Its lines were clean, its stone a warm, pale granite, its windows vast panels of glass that drank in the light. It was beautiful. It was honest. My heart gave a painful, unfamiliar lurch of admiration. A severe-looking woman in a black dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, met me at the door. "Miss Ashworth, I am Mrs. Gable, the Duke's housekeeper. His Grace is waiting for you in the library." Her expression was as unreadable as her master's, but her voice was not unkind. She led me through halls of polished stone and dark wood, the silence broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the crashing of the sea. There were no frivolous decorations, only soaring spaces, structural beams left exposed as part of the design, and priceless-looking architectural drawings framed on the walls. It was less a home and more a temple to the art of building. The library was breathtaking. It was a circular room 2 stories high, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with books. A rolling ladder snaked around the perimeter. In the center of the room, under a magnificent glass dome, was a massive table covered in blueprints and scrolls. And standing by the table, looking out at the tumultuous sea, was the Duke. He turned as I entered. In the clear morning light, he looked less like a myth and more like a man, albeit a formidable one. There were fine lines around his eyes, and a single lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice the same low baritone from the night before. "Please, come in." I approached the table, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to stop their trembling. I was still convinced this was a prelude to some cruel jest. Why else would a man like him summon a girl like me? "Your Grace," I managed, my voice a whisper. "I detest that title. You will call me Alistair." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." I sat. He remained standing, his gaze fixed on my face. I felt like a specimen under glass, my every flaw magnified. I braced myself, waiting for the dismissal, the sneer. It did not come. Instead, he picked up a rolled parchment from the table. "5 years ago," he began, his voice calm and measured, "a tutor named Master Hemlock submitted a portfolio of his students' work to the Royal Architectural Society. It was for a junior prize, nothing of great import. Most of the submissions were derivative, uninspired, but one essay was different." He began to unroll the parchment. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered Master Hemlock, a kind old man who had been my tutor for a brief summer before my stepmother had dismissed him for filling my head with unladylike nonsense. I remembered the essay. It was my analysis of the structural integrity of ancient Norlandic cathedrals, a subject I had been obsessed with. I had poured my heart into it, my belief that the builders had used complex mathematical principles that modern scholars had overlooked. I thought my stepmother had burned it. "It was an analysis of the hidden mathematics in Norlandic buttressing," he continued, his eyes scanning the page. "It argued that the masons used a form of proto-calculus to achieve their soaring heights. The author posited that the ornate carvings were not merely decorative, but served as counterweights, placed with geometric precision. It was a brilliant, original, and utterly convincing piece of work." He looked up from the parchment, and his gray eyes pinned me to my chair. "It was submitted anonymously, marked only with the initials E.A. Alara Ashworth." The air left my lungs in a rush. He had not seen a plain girl hiding in a corner. He had not seen a pitiable creature to be rescued. He had seen the author of an essay he had admired for 5 years. The ground shifted beneath my feet. This entire terrifying ordeal was not about my humiliation, it was about my mind. "How?" I stammered. "How did you know it was me?" "I have a good memory for details," he said simply. "And I make it my business to know things. When I heard Lord Ashworth's daughter was a reclusive bookworm, I made the connection. When I saw them hiding you behind a tapestry last night, I confirmed it. They were ashamed of the very thing I found most remarkable." He rolled the parchment back up with precise movements. "I have a project, Miss Ashworth. A problem I have been unable to solve. I believe you may be the only person in this kingdom with the mind to help me. For the first time in a decade, since my mother's death, I felt a flicker of something that was not fear or resignation. It was a fragile, terrifying thing. It was hope. Over the next several weeks, I was ferried to Valerius Keep twice a week. At home, I lived in a state of suspended war. Serafina was seething, her frustration mounting with every trip I took. She could not forbid it, one did not forbid a duke, but she made my life a misery in small, insidious ways. My meals would be cold, a favorite book would go missing, a cruel word would be hissed in passing. She was a snake coiling in the shadows, waiting to strike. My father avoided me entirely, unable to meet my eyes. Only Rosalind showed a flicker of change. She looked at me with a new, uncertain curiosity, as if seeing me for the first time. But the moment I stepped into the library at the Keep, all of that faded away. It became my sanctuary, my haven. Alistair, and it still felt strange and wonderful to use his name, was a demanding but patient partner. The problem was a new wing for the Keep he wished to build, one that would house a vast collection of scientific instruments. The challenge was the location, a precarious cliff edge prone to erosion and battered by fierce sea winds. It required a design of immense strength, but also of lightness and elegance, a structure that could withstand a gale without looking like a fortress. We worked for hours at the great table, poring over drawings, debating the merits of groin vaults versus barrel vaults, arguing about the tensile strength of different types of granite. He treated me not as a woman, not as a girl, but as an intellectual equal. He would listen to my ideas intently, his head cocked to one side, his gray eyes narrowed in concentration. He would challenge my assumptions, forcing me to defend my theories with logic and evidence. And when I made a breakthrough, when I solved a particularly thorny equation, a rare, almost smile would touch his lips, and it felt more rewarding than any compliment I had ever received. He spoke little of himself, but I began to piece together the man from the fragments he let slip. I learned he had a passion for astronomy, which was why he needed the new wing. I learned he despised inefficiency and dishonesty above all else. And one rainy afternoon, as we studied the blueprints for a bridge, his face grew shadowed and still. "This design is flawed," he said, his voice flat. "The load-bearing arch is too shallow. It puts too much faith in the mortar." "It could be reinforced," I suggested, pointing to a spot on the drawing. "It should have been built correctly the first time," he countered, his voice suddenly raw with an emotion I had never heard before. He looked away from the plans, out toward the rain-streaked sea. "My younger brother, Julian, was an architect, a prodigy. He designed the new bridge at Silverwood Crossing. He was brilliant, but he was too trusting." He paused, and the silence in the room was heavy with unspoken grief. A rival contractor used inferior materials, a cheaper mix of sand in the mortar. It saved them a pittance. The bridge collapsed during the spring floods. Julian was on it. The story fell into the quiet room, and I finally understood the source of his pain, the reason for his reclusion. It wasn't just grief, it was a profound disillusionment with a world where brilliance could be undone by petty greed. He had retreated into a world of logic and structure, a world where the rules were clear and the foundations were sound. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. He turned back to me, his eyes dark with memory. "He was like you," he said softly. "He believed that beauty and truth were the same thing, that a perfectly designed structure was a form of honesty." In that moment, the distance between us collapsed. He was not the formidable Duke of Valerius, and I was not the forgotten daughter of Lord Ashworth. We were two people who understood the solace of a well-drawn line, the integrity of a perfectly balanced arch. Instinctively, I reached out and placed my hand over his on the table. It was a small gesture, a breach of all propriety, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His hand was warm and strong beneath mine. He did not pull away, he simply looked down at our hands, then back up at my face, and his expression was one of profound, weary vulnerability. For a fraction of a second, the severe mask was gone, and I saw the lonely man beneath. The world seemed to stop. The only sounds, the rain on the glass and the frantic beating of my own heart. That touch, brief as it was, changed everything. The polite formality between us gave way to a quiet, charged intimacy. Our conversations grew more personal, straying from architecture to philosophy, to our dreams, to the quiet sorrows that had shaped us. I learned that he read poetry, that he had a dry, understated wit, that he cared deeply for the people who worked for him. He, in turn, drew me out of my shell, asking about my mother, about the books I loved, about the world I had built for myself inside my head. For the first time, I felt not just seen, but understood. I was no longer a gray ghost. I was becoming a person of color and substance, and it was his attention that was painting me into existence. But as the light grew within me, the shadows at home deepened. Serafina saw the change in me, a straighter spine, a clearer voice, a spark of confidence in my eyes, and she despised it. She could not comprehend a connection based on intellect. In her world, a man like the Duke only took an interest in a girl like me for one of two reasons: a temporary, perverse amusement, or to use her for some grander scheme. As it became clear that this was neither, her fear and rage escalated. A strategic marriage for Rosalind to a duke was one thing. A union of any kind for her worthless stepdaughter with the most powerful man in the kingdom was an existential threat to her entire worldview. The first blow came in the form of a letter. A footman from Valerius Keep delivered it to me one morning. It was from Alistair, but it was not his hand. The script was formal, cold. It was a curt dismissal. "Miss Ashworth," it read, "I find your services are no longer required. The project has been concluded. Do not return to the keep. A payment for your time will be sent to your father." The words were like stones, each one striking me with a physical force. I read it again and again, my mind refusing to accept it. Concluded? We were weeks from a final design. No longer required? Just yesterday, he had called my latest sketch revolutionary. It made no sense. The cold dread that had been my lifelong companion returned, flooding my veins. It had all been a game, a whim, and he had grown tired of it. The hope that had bloomed so brightly within me withered and died, leaving only the familiar ache of worthlessness. I did not go to the keep. I locked myself in my room, the letter clutched in my hand, and wept. I wept for the loss of the work, for the loss of our conversations, for the loss of the man I was beginning to— I couldn't even form the word. Most of all, I wept for my own foolishness in daring to believe I could ever be worthy of such a thing. 2 days passed in a gray haze of misery. On the third day, Serafina entered my room without knocking. She was dressed for travel, a triumphant, cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Get up," she ordered. "You are to be married." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What?" "Your father has arranged a match for you, with your cousin, Lord Fenwood. He is a good, sturdy man. A bit rough around the edges, but he has land on the northern border. It is for the best. You need a firm hand." Lord Fenwood. I remembered him from a family gathering years ago, a brutish, leering man twice my age, with a reputation for drink and cruelty. The northern border was a barren, uncivilized wasteland. It was a life sentence. It was exile. "No," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "It is not your decision to make," she hissed, her mask of civility gone, revealing the pure venom beneath. "Did you really think the Duke would have you? A plain, scribbling little mouse? His interest was an embarrassment. I have rectified the situation. I wrote to him and explained you were unwell, that your fancies were getting the better of you. I told him you were already promised to Lord Fenwood. I saved our family from ridicule." She smoothed her gloves, her eyes glittering with victory. "He was, I imagine, quite relieved to be rid of you. Now, pack your things. Lord Fenwood arrives tomorrow." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She had written to him. She had lied. The letter, the cold dismissal, it wasn't from him. It was a forgery. It was all her doing. The despair that had crushed me moments before was burned away by a sudden white-hot rage. It was an emotion so foreign and so powerful it left me breathless. She had not just tried to ruin my future. She had tried to poison my past. She had tried to make me believe that the most meaningful connection I had ever known was a lie. "You will not do this," I said, and I was shocked by the strength in my own voice. I stood up, meeting her gaze for the first time without flinching. She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "And who is going to stop me? Your father? The Duke who has already cast you aside. You have no one, Ilara. You have nothing." At that exact moment, the sound of a powerful horse galloping up the drive echoed through the house. It was followed by a thunderous knock on the front door that shook the very foundations of the manor. Serafina's smile faltered. We both knew there was only one man in the region who announced his arrival with such authority. A panicked maid appeared at my door. "My lady, it's the Duke of Valerius. He is asking for Miss Ilara." Serafina's face went pale. "Tell him she is indisposed." "It is too late for that," a deep voice boomed from the hallway. Alistair stood there, framed in the doorway of my small gray room. He was not dressed for a social call. He wore riding leathers and his face was a thundercloud. His eyes, flinty and hard, swept over the scene. My tear-stained face, Serafina's panicked fury, the packed travel trunk in the corner. He missed nothing. His gaze landed on Serafina, and it was so cold, so utterly contemptuous, that she physically recoiled. "I received a very interesting letter from you, Lady Serafina," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Followed by a very interesting visit from a sniveling fool named Fenwood, who seemed to be under the impression that he had my permission to marry this young lady. He took a step into the room, and the force of his presence seemed to shrink it. He held up a piece of paper, her letter. "You have a talent for forgery," he noted, his voice dripping with ice. "But not for strategy. Did you truly believe I was so easily manipulated?" Serafina drew herself up, a cornered animal preparing to strike. "This is a family matter, Your Grace. It has nothing to do with you. You made it my business when you used my name in your pathetic schemes," he snarled. "You made it my business when you tried to sell her like cattle. And you made it my business when you dared to harm her." He turned his eyes to me, and the fury in them softened into something else, something fierce and protective. "Ilara, she is lying. I sent no letter. I never would have. I came the moment I realized what she had done." The truth of his words washed over me, a wave of profound relief that made my knees weak. He had not abandoned me. He had come for me. "Now," Alistair said, turning his chilling gaze back to my stepmother, "you, your husband, and Rosalind will come with me to my home. Now. We are going to settle this family matter once and for all." His tone left no room for argument. It was not a request. It was a command. The final act had begun, and it would take place on his stage. The library at Valerius Keep, once my sanctuary, now felt like a courtroom. My father sat slumped in a chair, looking small and defeated. Rosalind stood near him, her face pale and confused. Serafina, however, had regained some of her composure. She stood rigid and defiant, her face a mask of wrong virtue. I stood near the great window, the stormy sea behind me a reflection of the tempest in my soul. Alistair stood in the center of the room, a figure of calm, righteous fury. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand. "Let us begin," Alistair said, his voice devoid of all warmth. He looked at my father. "Lord Ashworth, did you know that your late wife, Eleanor, left a private inheritance for her daughter? A portfolio of properties and investments to be managed in trust by you until Ilara came of age or married. An inheritance, I might add, that is worth nearly 3 times the value of your own estate." My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with genuine shock. "What?" "No, Eleanor's dowry was merged with the estate. There was nothing separate." "Was there not?" Alistair slid a legal document across the table. "This is your wife's will, and these," he added, laying down several more papers, "are bank statements, deeds, and letters from a solicitor, all addressed to you, all detailing the trust. A trust which, over the past 10 years, has been systematically drained. The property sold, the investments liquidated. The funds were transferred bit by bit into a private account." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he turned his gaze upon my stepmother. An account in the name of Lady Seraphina. The silence was absolute. My father stared at Seraphina, his face a canvas of dawning horror and betrayal. Rosalind gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Seraphina's mask finally cracked. "Lies!" she spat, her voice shrill. "This is a trick. He is trying to ruin us." "The evidence is quite clear," Alistair said calmly. "You intercepted the solicitor's letters. You forged your husband's signature. You stole Alara's birthright. You kept her in gray dresses and fed her scraps while you wore her mother's legacy on your back." Everything suddenly made sense. Her relentless cruelty, her desperation to keep me hidden, to marry me off to a brute in the wilderness. It was never just about social ambition. It was about greed. As long as I was unmarried and under her roof, she could control the narrative, suppress the truth. My marriage to a man like Alistair would have brought scrutiny, lawyers, questions she could not answer. She had not just been trying to crush my spirit, she had been trying to conceal a decade of theft. "You," my father whispered, his voice trembling with a rage I had never seen in him. "You did this? All this time?" "I did it for us," Seraphina shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "For this family. Your estate was failing. I saved us. She never would have known what to do with it anyway. Look at her, a pathetic, skulking little creature obsessed with dust and rocks. The money was wasted on her. And that was when I found my voice. The rage that had flickered to life in my bedroom now roared into a conflagration. I stepped forward from the window, away from the shadows, and into the center of the room. All eyes turned to me. "Wasted?" I said, my voice clear and ringing with a strength I did not know I possessed. "You think my mind is a waste? You think because I do not value silks and jewels that I have no value? For 10 years, you have tried to make me invisible. You dressed me in dust, you fed me silence, and you told me it was for my own good. You tried to convince me that my love for knowledge was a flaw, that my mind was a burden. You did not want a daughter. You wanted a mirror for your own vanity, and a ghost to haunt the halls so no one would look too closely at your crimes." I turned to my father. "And you let her do it. You traded my happiness for your quiet life. You saw her cruelty and you looked away. You are not a bad man, father, but you are a weak one, and I am done being the price of your peace." I looked at Rosalind, whose face was streaked with tears. "You were not cruel, Rosalind. You were just blind. You lived in the sun and never thought to ask what it was like to live in the shadows." Finally, I faced the woman who had been my tormentor for a decade. "You did not steal my money, Seraphina. You stole my childhood. You stole my mother's memory. That is a debt you can never repay, but you will not steal my future. You think I am nothing without my inheritance. You are wrong. My mind is my birthright. My spirit is my dowry, and that is something you are never strong enough to take from me." I stood there, breathless, my heart pounding. I had spoken the truth, all of it, and I was not afraid. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of shock, but of judgment. Rosalind was the first to move. She crossed the room and stood beside me, taking my hand. "She's right," she whispered, looking at her mother with newfound clarity. "She is right. You were always so cruel to her. I never understood. Now I do." My father finally stood, his face aged by 20 years. He looked at Seraphina with utter revulsion. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice a low growl. "Get out of my life." Alistair delivered the final, crushing blow. "You will be exiled from this region, Lady Seraphina," he stated, his voice like the chipping of ice. "You will repay every last coin you stole, or I will hand these documents to the Crown Prosecutor. You will find that prisons are even more gray than the dresses you forced upon your stepdaughter. The choice is yours." Defeated, exposed, and utterly alone, Seraphina crumpled. The fight went out of her, leaving only a bitter, hissing shell. She gave me one last look of pure, undiluted hatred, then turned and walked from the room, a queen dethroned. My father followed, not looking back, a broken man heading off to survey the ruins of his life. And then we were alone. Just Alistair and I, standing in the quiet of the great library. The storm outside had passed, and a sliver of pale sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was trembling, the aftermath of the confrontation coursing through me. Alistair came to me, his expression gentle. He didn't say, "I saved you." He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply took my hands in his. They were cold, and his were so warm. "You saved yourself, Alara," he said softly, his gray eyes full of a profound respect that was more intoxicating than any declaration of love. "I merely provided the foundation. You built the arch." He led me to the window seat, and we sat for a long time in silence, watching the waves crash against the cliffs. The anger and pain began to recede, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of peace. I was free, not just from my stepmother, but from the ghost I had been forced to become. "Ilara," he said, turning to face me, "when my brother died, I thought the world had lost its integrity. Everything seemed false, weak, built on lies. I retreated from it. I surrounded myself with old books and solid stone because they were the only things I could trust. And then I found that essay, a voice of pure, unshakable logic and passion, a mind that saw the world as I did, as a series of structures to be understood, a place where truth and beauty could be one and the same." He cupped my face in his hands, his touch both firm and tender. "I did not seek you out to rescue you. I sought you out because I was lonely. I have spent years searching for an equal, a partner, not just in work, but in life." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I see you, Alara. I saw you 5 years ago in the words on a page, and I saw you last night, even when you were hidden in the shadows. I don't want to be your savior. I want to be your partner. I want to build a life with you on a foundation of trust and truth. I want to wake up next to you every morning and argue about the principles of architecture." A tear I didn't know I was holding back slid down my cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb. "Marry me, Alara Ashworth," he whispered, his voice rough with vulnerability. "Build your future with me." It wasn't a question of acceptance, it was a question of coming home. "Yes," I breathed, the word a release, a promise, an affirmation of everything I now knew myself to be. "Yes, Alistair." He leaned in and kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion or possession, but of profound recognition. It was the meeting of two souls who had been speaking the same language from a distance for years. It was the end of a very long, very cold winter. It was the feeling of a perfectly placed keystone, locking everything into place, strong and true and able to withstand any storm. 1 year later, I stood in the balcony of the newly completed observatory wing of Valerius Keep. The wind coming off the sea was cold and sharp, but I did not feel it. I was warm, wrapped in my husband's arms. The wing was my design, my triumph. Its soaring glass dome and impossibly elegant buttresses were a testament not just to my knowledge, but to my freedom. From the ashes of my old life, I had built something new and beautiful and enduring. Below us, the sea crashed against the cliffs. I was no longer the Duchess of Valerius in title alone. I was a respected partner in all of Alistair's endeavors, my opinion sought after by scholars and engineers who came to marvel at what we had built together. My father and Rosalind had moved to a smaller estate in the south. We exchanged letters, and in them I could feel a slow, painful healing beginning. Serafina was a ghost of the past, a name whispered in cautionary tales in the drawing rooms of the capital. Alistair rested his chin on my head, his arms tightening around me. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a familiar comfort against my ear. I smiled, leaning back against his solid strength. "I was thinking about the color gray," I said. "I used to think it was the color of invisibility, the color of dust and forgetting." I turned in his arms to face him, placing my hands on his chest. I looked into his eyes, the color of a storm-swept sea, filled with intelligence and a love so deep it still sometimes stole my breath away. But now I know it's the color of granite foundations, the color of a thoughtful sky, the color of the man who taught me that the most important thing in the world is not to be seen by everyone, but to be truly seen by one. He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that was reserved only for me, and lowered his head to kiss me. And in the quiet peace of our home, built on a foundation of truth and held together by love, I knew I was finally, irrevocably visible.